my name is Beck and welcome to some spoiler thoughts about the Red Rising saga. This is only going to include the first 3 books though, so Red Rising, Golden Sun and Morning Star, because I recently reread and really enjoyed the trilogy. So I want to break this video up into talking about Red Rising and then Golden Sun and then Morning Star specifically, because I have notes for each one. This is more my general thoughts as well, not necessarily like a review video or anything. So let me know down below what your favorite moment in the Red Rising series is or who your favorite character is. I would love to know. Now, I gave these books the same rating as I did the first time I read them. So I gave Red Rising 4.5 stars and then Golden Sun and Morning Star are 5 stars each. And I just want to disclose the reason why I can't really give Red Rising the same rating as the next 2 books. And I feel like the writing style of Pierce Brown was just getting itself going, and you can see a lot of the thematic drive that he's going for come to fruition more in the sequels than you can in the first book. And I also just hate the trope that starts the ball rolling in Red Rising, which is when Io is killed. So it's called the woman in the fridge trope, I think. It's when a female character is killed off to further a male storyline. And when I was reading the books, it just made me think, man, I would love to read this series from Io's perspective. I would just love to know what she would do instead of Darrow, because she would have a fire to her, whereas Darrow had a grief to him and an aggression, whereas Io had the compassion and the drive. So it would have shaped the series in a different way, and I think it would have had a different interesting angle, but we got Darrow and I like Darrow, so I can't complain too much, but I think it would have been interesting too to see Io's perspective. This book also used certain phrasing like throwing like a girl and making girls equivalent to not as strong. And so making that comparison was like a lazy stereotype to me. So those are like the negative things that I found about this series, but there are some incredible parts to it too that were just mind-blowing and so cinematic to read about. Like when the Howlers came out of the horse bodies when they were in not the passage, but they were in the Institute. I forgot also that the Institute was set along such a long period of time. Like Darrow enters the Institute after killing Julian. He enters the Institute at 16 years old and he exits the Institute at 20. So they spent a lot of time in there, and that was all like survival mode, trying to build up to what they will become as Golds. So if Golds are set up that way and they're set up to be cutthroat and savage, whereas Darrow observes that Reds are a people of love and song and dance. It's such a stark comparison, and so Darrow is trying to bridge that gap, which is a theme that I really enjoyed, finding the humanity and giving people choice. Because at the beginning of the book, he didn't have any choice over his repression, and Io made her choice in order to sacrifice herself for her people. So I like that this series forces people to choose and to think rather than just to be what they've been told they are the whole time. So that's the message of the series that I really like. And also, I know it happens, I knew to expect it, but Pax's death every time just breaks my heart. And the constant throwbacks to Pax across the second and third book as well just really like get me. They just get me because Pax was such an iconic character of all heart, and I just miss him. So it's nice to see that he got throwbacks in the sequels to this series as well. And then the ending of Red Rising, I'd actually forgotten about it because all of the things leading up to the ending were very climactic and they were just fantastically told, and they had such movement and drive to them. But when it came to the ending, it was just kind of talking heads, and so it was a bit anticlimactic compared to what had already been established. Like Pierce Brown had obviously set up that he knows his characters really well. He will flesh them out and then make them really tense and force their choices that way. And it creates a lot of interesting tension because you don't know which way, once squished, a character is going to go. So when it came to the ending and Darrow didn't choose Lorne, he chose Augustus, so Mustang's father, the guy who killed Io. When he chose him, I was like, this seems more like a political move, and Darrow has proven that he acts more so with his heart, even though he knows he should act with his head. So he is a calculating character, but I didn't think that necessarily suited the story. It felt like it was being written for the plot rather than for what Darrow would do. But I'm sure people will disagree with me. Like, I know Darrow thinks things through to a certain extent, and that was a very calculated choice of his, but I still don't agree that that was an interesting way to end the book. It was okay, but it wasn't an ending that I loved compared to the sequels. And then we go into Golden Sun, and I forgot that there was a time skip here. Not too big of a time skip, but there is a small one, and obviously Darrow is learning to train from Lorne Al-Arcos, which is what gives him an edge later. So technically he kind of did choose Lorne, but then also chose Augustus. So it was a nice twist when it came to fighting that duel with Cassius and how he basically cleaned the floor with Cassius. I quite like that, but I find the root of their, I guess, positioning as enemies to be really stupid, because Cassius is all about honor, but Darrow wasn't the perpetrator. He was manipulated into being so. Julian was put into the passage with him by Gold on purpose. So why then, as Cassius, would you defend your rank as Gold when they've obviously set people up in order to be culled off and killed? So it didn't make sense. It seemed kind of frivolous and petty, and I guess that kind of is what Gold is supposed to encapsulate. So it's kind of circular in that way, but it just frustrated me to read about their constant tension when I'm like, you guys just need to kind of see the forest through the trees a little bit, and then maybe you might not want to kill each other. Who knows? And then two of Darrow's friends, so Tactus and Ragnar. So I forgot that Tactus died, but it was done in a way that he seemed perceived as kind of a villainous, sociopathic character, which is what Gold had set him up to be and what his family had driven him to become. And then Darrow was starting to undo that. And in his death, obviously, Darrow didn't kill him. I think it was Lorne that killed him because he was part of the kidnapping of Lorne's grandchildren. And so upon giving him the chance to change, Darrow extended the olive branch. And so he started to change, but he was killed too early. And then Ragnar was also given a choice in this book, and he definitely chose to follow Darrow. Ragnar becomes one of my favorite characters, which is why Morningstar hit me really, really hard. But while Ragnar incites emotion in me and elicits feelings, Tactus really didn't. Like, I didn't like him from the beginning, but if you are going to convey somebody in your story like Tactus and then kill him off in a way that he was just on the cusp of changing, it's like cutting off his journey. And I noticed that Pierce Brown does that quite often, or not quite often, but regularly enough to make it hit you. And he tends to kill off his characters in a thematic way as well as a plot way. And what I mean here is near the end of this book, where the Jackal has obviously positioned everybody and Roke has betrayed him. Side note, I never really liked Roke. I don't like his privilege. I've hated his positioning of how he's feeling like he's above everybody and it feels like he deserves that, where he will just actively exploit all of the lower colours around him. I've never liked Roke. And so in Morningstar, when he was like, you lost me when they killed Quinn, it's like, Darrow didn't even do that. He was defending you the whole time, and you're going to be a martyr for the wrong reason. No. Anyway, I don't like Roke, but I do like Ragnar, and I didn't really get emotional at Tactus dying. But Pierce Brown has set up all of these characters with different dynamics in what they represent. So Lorne, I was getting to, he represents the tradition of the Golds and the society. And so when the Jackal came in and killed him or orchestrated his death, he was effectively killing off the old way that things are done. And he's trying to set up his new age as becoming potentially the sovereign. That's what he's gunning for, ultimately, ultimate power and control. And so Lorne's death served that purpose, because he's kind of come to the end of his arc. He was with Darrow, he trained Darrow, he's got his own family. He was kind of trying to sit outside of all of the politics, and we're shown in a story format that doesn't work. You've got to be involved, and if you're not involved and you're not aware, then you're going to get killed off. And that's what happened to Lorne. He believed in the old ways and he didn't want to change. And then Tactus was very deeply set in the old ways, but he made a choice to change and was cut off by Lorne before he could do that. So I like that someone who got killed by following the old ways was somebody who also killed Darrow's friend, who was just on the cusp of changing as well. It's an interesting lens and link to kind of make, and I didn't really think about it until after I'd finished my reread of the trilogy. I also like that Darrow is building up trust between the gold allies he made at the Institute, and that is represented in Severo when Severo edits the Hollow. I think at the end of Red Rising, he edits the Hollow to mute out Bloody Dam when Darrow killed one of the Olympians, I think. So Severo is already demonstrating that he's a loyal friend, but he does go off the rails a little bit in terms of grief when his father is killed at the end of Golden Sun. So there's whole layers of grief and survivor's guilt that goes with Darrow for Eo's death, and then with Severo for his father Fitchner's death. And I like that echo of different stories and how it impacts different characters and their relationships with each other. I found the loyalty quite inspiring, and it also made me look at Roke and go, he's too comfortable in his privilege and he won't make change because that causes a stir for him, whereas Reds are literally dying because they're at 40 or 50 years old, and that's the cusp of their lifespan, whereas Golds live to over hundreds of years old because they have the privilege, the power, and the access to medical supplies that the Reds don't. So it's such an interestingly thematic book. Sometimes I think the themes kind of overtake the story in some parts, especially when Darrow has a narrative style of being able to just sum things up in a sentence and make it poignant and dramatic. I do like that about him though, and it's a very specific style that Pierce Brown is going for here. And I think this is why I felt a little bit distant from Iron Gold and Dark Age, because they deviate a little bit from that style, and that's done on purpose because we've grown past Darrow's story. And also at the end of Golden Sun, the fact that Mustang was physically not present, I was like, surely this should tell Darrow something, like something is off. Mustang would show and back you up if she could, even though Darrow had just taken her to his real Red family and shown her who he actually was. Surely Mustang would be smart enough to actually communicate something. And so the fact that she was absent at the end, I was like, Darrow, why are alarm bells not going off for you right now? And I do like his line earlier before he was just showing Mustang who his family was. And he said something like, I promise myself I'll tell her if we survive this, which is him cresting the fact that Golds lie to each other all the time, and they don't have a foundation of trust and kinship and love. So he's trying to bring the Red dynamic to a Gold scenario and change the society that way by building relationships rather than isolating people. So the themes in this book series are so good. Pierce Brown has just started or is on the cusp of becoming such a brilliant intentional writer, because you can see the tendrils of what he's building early in this series, and he's only going to grow into somebody who can tap into that more readily and with more nuance as he practices more. So that's why I'm really excited to reread Iron Gold and Dark Age and see. I know I didn't love them the first time around, but now that I've got a different lens and a bit of distance from the series, and now that I've reread it and experienced all of the themes and positioning of characters, I think I could potentially really like the sequels, when before I've given them about 3 stars, and they were okay, but I really wanted to love them like I loved the trilogy. And that leads me into talking about Morningstar, because there was some awesome foreshadowing that I just completely missed the first time, and that was when Darrow was imprisoned by the Jackal and he is sent a rescue team, and the 2 Greys that are rescuing him mention Ephraim, and I know that Ephraim is in Iron Gold as one of the main perspectives, and it turns out that when the Greys are rescuing Darrow and Victra, that they mention Ephraim is around, and Trig and Holiday are the 2 Greys rescuing Darrow and Victra, but they're siblings, and then Trig is murdered by Aja, who is serving the current sovereign. It's mentioned that Trig's fiance is Ephraim, and Ephraim is off planet at the moment, so the fact that we're continuing this cycle like Darrow predicted, death begets death begets death, because we've got generations after this entire war still having a ripple effect, and there's a whole thing going on with that, with other characters that don't feel aligned with what Darrow was doing because they feel distant from him, and I just love all of the ripple effects that this has started to set up. Additionally to that, there is also discussions of the war that's happening. So Darrow has effectively been outside of the war for like 9 months because he's been locked in a concrete box by the Jackal as torture. And so he's out of touch with everything. And I think either Trig or Holiday mentioned that there are prison camps for the low colours, maybe on Luna. And so we get a character from those prison camps in Iron Gold. So it's setting the foundations of everything before we've even started Iron Gold, which is just brilliant world building and very clever to me. And you can also tell in this book the level of distance and growth that Darrow has had, because he's now 23, which is very young, but for a Red, it's like half of their life cycle, right? So he has now experienced things differently. He's gotten not over his grief, but kind of through it for Io. But now he's got to survive the war. And you can tell by his levels of cruelty, so what he allows. Because at the beginning of the book, you can see Severo kind of going off the rails and torturing this Pink for information on Quicksilver. And Quicksilver has been an ally of the Jackal this whole time. And I completely forgot that Quicksilver was a son of Ares. But yes, back to Severo having that meltdown and Darrow's character growth. You can see how Severo's going off the rails when he's torturing this Pink, and Darrow recognizes the Pink as Mateo and saves him, and that turns out to be Quicksilver's lover or his husband. It just has ripple effects. The cruelty and death begets death begets death. It's an ongoing theme. So that cruelty that Darrow was letting happen, he wouldn't have stood by and done that in book 1. He would have shut that off, but he was kind of a spectator to it because he was involved in it, and he's made a stand against Severo, even though Severo is his best mate. So grief is really twisted Severo, and I like that this was a story about Severo kind of rediscovering where he stands in the rebellion, especially with Sephi the Obsidian, so Ragnar's sister. He hangs himself and Cassius, and she makes the choice. He kind of positions himself the way Darrow has positioned their other friends so far. He makes Steffi decide, and she ultimately decides to be part of the rebellion and to cut him down from being hanged, which is, great, good things. But he gave her that choice, and in giving her that choice, he decided himself to become his own version of Ares and not try and be like his father. So there's such brilliant layering here of surviving, of fighting, of having survivor's guilt, the themes here of grief and companionship and choice. And I like that none of these characters necessarily like each other, but they have combined forces in order to fight that greater evil, and they've decided to work together. And Sephi pretty much decides doing this upon realizing that her mother has betrayed the Obsidians and has kept them in slavery, because the words that she utters after 25 years of silence is, she knew, when Darrow says something. So she knew from listening all this time that her mother was aware of the Obsidian situation as being slaves, and she's never done anything to combat that because knowing gave her power over everybody. And Sephi's like, I'm going to change this. And so that's what Ragnar wanted. He wanted freedom for his people and change, and it absolutely broke my heart when Ragnar died. I knew as soon as I started Morningstar, I was like, I'm in for some heartbreak, because this is one of the scenes that stands out to me across the entire series. And I don't want to say it's my favorite scene, but it's the most impactful scene to me about Ragnar not holding the sword when he died. He was holding her hand instead. He chose to die with honor and as a free man. And that just breaks my heart, because kind of like Tactus, he was killed off during his journey. Like, he couldn't fulfill that promise. He was cut off halfway. So this is a story about Ragnar's glory and then Ragnar not being able to continue that glory and having to pass on the baton. So that's what makes it so heartbreaking that he can't continue by himself. I also really like that Mustang shot Cassius in the throat, because I feel like he deserved it from being an idiot this whole time instead of actually seeing the forest for the trees. Thank you, Mustang. Mustang actually, I think, is my favorite character in this series. I do like a lot of characters, but Mustang is definitely my favorite. And I love how loyal and calculating and intelligent she is. And I also love her strength, but I also love Victra as well. They're very, very different characters. And I enjoy that for a reason. So Victra fights her vulnerability, but she has these quieter moments of respect with Darrow. And so I'm not going to lie, when she joined the Sons of Ares and Darrow gave her that choice, made me tear up. And same with Ragnar's death, I was tearing up as well. So there are several moments across this series that just hit me right in the heart. Now, there is significant foreshadowing in this book as well. One of them is when Darrow says, I love children but feel alien from them these days. And this must be a side effect of his trauma from fighting in war and being tortured by the Jackal. He must have some kind of barrier to feeling that love that he started the series with, which is really heartbreaking. He started the series with kinship and love for his people and being so comfortable about who he was. And now he's gone through all of this trauma and experienced death, and he doesn't feel like he deserves to be around kids and their wholesomeness, I suppose, which is just a heartbreaking thing to consider when you're about to start reading Iron Gold. And then Cassius also has a significant quote, and he's gone, "Aren't you afraid you're going to break everything and not put it back together?" And so this whole book, Mustang positions Darrow in going, I need you to be a builder, not a breaker. And yes, they broke a lot of things, including the society, but I think they are positioning to kind of build it back up again. But a lot has to be broken first, and whatever they do, someone is going to suffer. They just want to make it as minimal suffering as possible. But how are you supposed to fix 700 years of repression in 1 or 2 wars? They're interplanetary as well, so it's not just up to Darrow, but he's made his choice, and I think that is a valuable choice, but I don't know if that gets reneged on a little bit later. But I do like the way that Morningstar ended. And I did really want him to redeem Roke in a certain way, but Roke really embodies that kind of toxic honor of the Golds. And so when he took his own life at the end of Morningstar, while it was sad, it was kind of justified. He's the only death I felt was right, even though I wasn't as emotional about it. Like, I wasn't really emotional about Cactus's death, but that thematically also felt like it was supposed to happen. I don't know. I just feel like this death, I just don't like Roke, so maybe I feel like this death was justified. Maybe that's all it is. And then we've got a couple of foreshadowing things again, because Lysander is part of this book. I mean, he's been part of the book a little bit, but I completely forgot about who the heck he was when I was reading Iron Gold. So the fact that he's in this book at the end when they are taking down Aja and the Sovereign, I was like, I completely forgot that this kid existed at this point in the story. So he's only 10 here, and he is the one that hands the scepter over to Mustang. And what does he say? He says something, she's no traitor, she is our conqueror. He's trying to make everyone believe that she's the embodiment of gold. But I'm like, oh, I know this kid is surely making a play at something, like playing the long game. He's been trained by the Sovereign and Aja, like of course he can't be trusted. And at the beginning he also idealizes Cassius, but then Cassius was acting the whole time because he was part of the ploy with Darrow, which I completely forgot. I thought in the moment he turned to Darrow's side, so it makes a little bit more sense that he went into the situation as an act, because that's otherwise a lot that Darrow was riding on, like the hope that he would just change his mind in the moment. So I loved that ending. But oh man, I forgot that Cerro got shot 6 times. I knew he wasn't dead based on what I'd read, but I'm like, how can his body just be like flung places and he's been fine? So I was like, surely something is going on here, but my little brain couldn't figure it out because I've forgotten everything. But I like that there is a ton of foreshadowing in here that I completely missed. So Lysander is one thing, and his relationship with idolizing Cassius, and not respecting Darrow, because obviously he witnessed Darrow murder his mum. So that's a setup for the next series. But we've also got Darrow betraying Romulus, and Romulus lives on the Rim, and Darrow destroyed Ganymede, which are like all of the docks around the Rim. So Darrow has effectively cut the Rim off and stopped their power. And so Romulus would be pretty mad about that. He stopped all their exchange and their stock and everything. So he pretended to be Roke when he did that. And so naturally that's surely going to come and bite him. That is not something that Book 1 Darrow would have done. That is something that a Gold would have done. So he has started to amalgamate his red identity with his gold identity. And I was hoping that he'd kind of stay more on the love and kinship side as a red, but I think he gets his own version of power hungry. So when it came to this trilogy, I really liked that Mustang became what Darrow was, but to the high colours. So Darrow is a bridge to the low colours and Mustang's a bridge to the high. So with both of them, they can unite everybody. And I just love the themes. I love the ideas in this series. And I love how in this book, Darrow has removed the sigils from his hands. So he's not a colour, he's just a person. And people act with repulsion against that because they're very comfortable, a lot of them, with where they exist in society. Like they've got their particular role that they will adhere to. And it's a very interesting commentary just in general. Overall, it's just a really clever series, and I can see why people read it and reread it, because I might end up rereading it as well, just to re-experience all of these themes. It was a very cleverly written book, but I think as it goes further along, it could get a lot more intricate, and I'm excited to read about that too. However, when it comes to the ending, I both do really like it, but it just kind of irks me as well, because Mustang reveals that she wanted Darrow to be a maker, not a breaker, because they have a son. And I was like, I completely missed the part where they had sex. Like, I missed it the first time and I missed it the second time. Or maybe it's in Golden Sun, because I don't remember them doing anything in Morning Star, at least not on the page. So I was like, I was really confused. I was like, oh, this is a plot twist that seems very twisty. I think it was just like a sentence or something in Golden Sun that they had sex, and then now Mustang was secretly pregnant and then had the baby, and they've named their son Pax, which is like, ow, my heart, but beautifully named, beautiful choices, but also an odd plot twist that felt like it came somewhat out of left field. Was it set up properly? If it was that easy to miss, who knows? I do like the ending, even though Darrow said that he feels distant from children these days. I think this is giving him a second chance to not be like a figurehead. It's giving him a chance to be a man and to experience the family that he ultimately missed out on having with Io, because we find out that Io was pregnant when she died. So I don't like that choice. I just don't like it. Why add more trauma and sorrow onto what was already a traumatic and tragic event? Obviously, I'm a fan of this series. I just have certain gripes with it. One of the other gripes, actually, I probably should have mentioned at the beginning, was the fact that some of the characters that I perceived as potentially not straight characters, so queer characters, were killed off. However, I was like, oh, didn't all of them get killed off? But no, Victra didn't. But I believe that Tactus and Roke weren't necessarily straight. I remember Darrow observing them and how like close they were during the Institute days, and I was like, oh, okay. And then also obviously Trig, whose fiance was Ephraim, and he got stabbed in the chest. So I was like, oh, not great choices that I necessarily agree with, but a lot of people died in this series, so I don't know. I'm kind of lukewarm on that, to be honest. But that trope, so bury your gays, as well as the woman in the fridge trope, are just very tired, and they tend to alienate me from series. But the way that this series was written, it's not that I could necessarily forgive those tropes, it's just that I could get on with enjoying the story and kind of ignore them. So take that as you will, but let me know down below who your favourite character was in Red Rising, because mine is definitely Mustang. And thank you so much for watching this video. Come chat to me in the comments, and I'll see you at my next one. Bye.